Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today I'm going to go over how to set up a network weather map in LibreNMS using the plugin Weathermap. This is actually one of my favorite features of LibreNMS, but it's kind of extremely clunky and a little bit confusing to get working properly. It took me a little while to actually get this off the ground, so just thought I would share a little bit of my experience here and how to actually get it set up with little to no pain. So I'm going to be using my existing LibreNMS setup for my actual house. If you haven't seen the video on how to actually set up LibreNMS, just check that out before you go this far, because I'm going to jump right into the plugin, and I'm not really going to go over how to add devices or set up LibreNMS or any of that. So let's get right to it. So I'm logged into my LibreNMS setup here. So I'm going to go up to Overview, Plugins, and I'm going to click on Weathermap. And you can see it popped out my two maps to the side. These are two that I've already created, but I'm just going to click on the name itself, which is going to take us to this page. And it says click here to access the editor where you can create and manage maps. So we're going to click on that link, and that brings us to this really sophisticated looking page. And you can see we really have two options here. We can either create a new map, which is what we're going to do today, or we can make a new map, which is just a copy of one that's already existing. And you can see I have two that already exist, so I could just copy one of those if I want to, or I can edit one of those two down here. So once we create a map, it'll show up down here for us to actually edit. Now, an important note here, you can see it says open an existing map, and then it gives you this file path. We are looking in opt LibreNMS HTML plugins Weathermap configs. This is where the actual configuration files are saved, and the only way to really delete a map once you've created it is to actually terminal into the LibreNMS server itself, browse to that path, and delete the configuration file. There isn't a GUI for actually deleting these once they're created. And we'll get in there and take a look at that here in a minute, because there's a couple very specific file names that you have to create in order for you to actually see your map. So let's go ahead and create a new one here, and I'm going to call it Toasty. And you have to put .conf at the end or it will not create your map. And we can just see if I backspace that and hit create, it's going to give us an error. Error creating map file needs to end in .conf. So toasty.conf, go ahead and create, and here is our map editor. Now the first thing you're probably going to want to do is change the resolution of this. So let's go to map properties, and you can see by default we are at 800 by 600 pixels on our map size. Now that might be big enough for very small networks, but I like to up this. The one I use for my house is actually 1920 by 1080, but let's go ahead and do just 1280 by 720. And we'll go ahead and hit submit just to see that change. You can see we have a lot more area to work with now. Now the second thing we want to do is probably the most important, and that is to create our output image name and output HTML file name. Both of these are under the map properties, and both of these are pretty specific. And you can see I've already pretty much made these before, toasty.jpg and toasty.html. You do have to have the file extensions on here for these to work. If you don't fill out these correctly, then you won't be able to view your map, basically. So I'm going to go ahead and type in toasty.jpg and toasty.html. And basically what these are is the HTML is going to create the interactive map, and it's pretty much just going to overlay this toasty.jpg file. Now we can select a background image if we want, however, just be aware that it will change the resolution of the entire map to whatever these are when you select it. So you might want to select that before you change the resolution, but I'm just going to go with no background. We don't really need one for anything. I am going to change the map title to Toasty's Map, and we can change the legend text if we want to. I'm going to leave that the way it is, because as you'll see later, our legend will actually show our traffic load. And if we want to, we can change the default link bandwidth. So by default, it's going to assume that every link in the network is 100 megabits. If every link in your network is a gig and you want it to reflect that, then we can change that to 1000 here. I'm going to leave it the way it is now, just because barely anything in my network is going to take over 100 megabits, and I kind of want to be alerted as to when it is at that threshold, even if that is 1/10 of the entire link speed. So we're going to go ahead and just submit these, and now we can actually start making our map. So the first thing we're going to want to do is add a node. So just go up here, click add node, and that enables this cross cursor. And pretty much wherever you click, that's where it's going to put the node. So I'm going to click somewhere around up here, and it creates this little box called node. If we click on that, we get to edit it. Now this first box is the position. This is pretty much how you move nodes after they're created. You can click and put a node wherever you want when you're adding it, but if you want to move it around, you can't just like click and drag. You have to actually manually enter the position in XY coordinates. So right now we're at 629 pixels over from the right, and we are 97 pixels down from the top. What I like to do is just kind of make these round numbers. So we're going to go actually 640 because that's exactly halfway in the middle. Remember, our resolution is 1280 by 720, so half of 1280 is 640. So that's dead center. And I'm just going to make that 100 just to have a nice even number. And if we go ahead and submit with just that change, our node just moved over a little bit. Like that was barely a change at all. So I'm going to go back in and configure the rest of it. You don't have to worry about an internal node name if you don't want to, but if you're really anal about organization, you can change that, but really there's no need to. Label, this is what will actually show up on the map, so instead of it being called node, it's going to be called router now. And these two boxes can be automatically filled out by clicking this link, and it's pick from LibreNMS. So here's where you actually pick the device that you want this node to represent. So I want this to represent ER Illini, which is my main router. So we can kind of just search that, and this is going to search all of the devices that you've already added into LibreNMS. If your device doesn't show up here, it's probably not added. So go ahead and add it, and then select it here. And you can see it automatically fills out those two boxes for the hover over graph and also where it'll take you if you click on the node on the map. Now the last thing we're going to configure is the icon file name. This is just a list of pretty much pre-made pictures for the icons. Since we're doing a router, I'm going to go ahead and click the one that says router right here, and we'll go ahead and submit. And you can see this change to our erillini.lan has the router icon. And if we were to actually click on this in the map, it would take us to the LibreNMS device page for this device. But let's go ahead and add a couple more here so we can actually get a map. So add node. I'm going to put this kind of in the center. Click on that. I'm going to change the label to switch. Ooh, I clicked dead center on that one. But I am going to change this to probably about 300. No, let's go 400. And pick from LibreNMS. I'm going to go with Illini Core, which is my main switch. And because it's a switch, I'm going to select workgroup switch icon. And we'll go ahead and submit that. And we'll add one more node just over here to the left somewhere. Click on that, and I'm going to call that desktop. Pick from LibreNMS. My desktop is named Biscuit, so I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to use the host image. Now, since I did select that from LibreNMS, it did change my label to the actual device name. But I am just going to modify that because why not? Now, once we have our devices here, we can start to add links between them. So instead of clicking add node, we're going to click add link. And an important thing to note here is the first device you click on is basically going to be the from device, and the second device you click on is going to be the to device. It really doesn't matter too much. You can kind of configure your way around this, and you'll understand what I'm saying in just a few seconds. But you really kind of want to click on your nodes in order of top down. So like I click on my router first, that selects the router, and then I'm going from router to switch. Now when I actually click on this link to configure it, and I go to pick from LibreNMS for the data source, it's going to automatically have erillini.lan as my host, and then I'm going to pick the interface from this device. Now you can change this. You can put a completely unrelated link in here if you want, but just because that's the first one we clicked on, that's the one that it defaults to. So let's go ahead and select the link between these two devices, and for mine that's going to be Ethernet 1 internal LAN. Here we can change some of the defaults. So like in the map properties, we had 100 megabits set for our default bandwidth. We can change that per link if we want to. I'm going to leave it as it is. We can change the width of it if we want, and we can also add some comments for in and out. So like Since we clicked on our router first and then our switch second, technically our in is going to be the switch and our out is going to be the router. So we can label this whatever the switch interface is. So 1020, for example. I know that's not the actual interface it's on. And then the out we can label ETH1. So let's go ahead and submit that. And you can very, very faintly see that label. Let me see if I can zoom in. You can see it put that label behind there, GI1020 on the switch end, and probably behind the actual router icon, it threw ETH1. Typically, I don't use those labels for that reason. You can't really control where they go, and you can barely see them anyway unless you tweak the color settings. So I'm just going to go ahead and backspace those out of there and submit the configuration, and there is our link. So let's go ahead and add the last one from the core to the desktop. Click on that link to configure it. Data source, pick from LibreNMS. We're automatically on Illini core because that's the first one we clicked on. And if I do a search here, apparently it's not going to find what I want. So let's go through the list right here. Gigabit Ethernet 18 description biscuit. I'm going to go ahead and select that because that is the port that my desktop is connected to. And that's really all we need to do. Hit submit, and we've got it. Now, I'm a little bit anal about my maps, so let's go ahead and click on desktop and move that to the same height as Illini core, which I believe was 400. Submit. There. Now our line's straight. And this is one of the clunky features about this weather map is that I can't drag and drop these. If I want to move them, I do have to actually change XY coordinates. So let's say we want to move desktop to the right of the map. Instead of it being 167, we're going to put it at like 800, and that'll flop it somewhere over here. And that is too close to our switch. We can't even see the bandwidth levels on our link, so we're going to go ahead and go a little further. We'll say 1,000. And there's really kind of a lot of trial and error on these numbers and where they're going to end up, but they do match up to the pixels. So you've got 1280 pixels left to right and 720 top to bottom. And obviously that'll change depending on the resolution you set your map to. So now that this is pretty much all created, we can click on Position Legend. You don't have to do this, but it's just kind of good to have. Wherever you put this cross is going to be the top left of the legend. So let's click right here. And now we have our legend. So the links are going to turn these colors depending on the traffic load. And we'll see that in just a minute. Let's go ahead and position the timestamp. Again, you don't have to do this. Right now it's up here in the top right, but if you want it somewhere else, you can just click and it moves the timestamp. Now our simple map is pretty much done right now, so there is no save button. Everything is constantly saving as you're going, and really to get back you have to navigate back to LibreNMS, go to the overview, go to the overview drop-down, plugins, and then when you go to Weathermap, you should have your new map off to the side here. So let's go ahead and click on Toasty's map, and this is the map that we get. Now, one thing you'll notice is that our legend isn't here and our timestamp hasn't been moved. That's because these maps update pretty slowly. I don't know what the timer is on them, but your changes that you make to your map are not going to be instant. You have to wait pretty much like a few minutes for it to actually reflect any changes that you make. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh and just see if it picks up any of those changes yet. Nope, it's not. But we can see we've got our devices we put there and our links are actually showing us the data. So traffic coming from our router to our switch is using 3.18% of the 100 megabits that we set that link to. And if we click on the link, it takes us to that actual port in LibreNMS. So you can see ER-Illini, port Ethernet 1, and then we have our bandwidth graph and whatever else we want to go to. If we go back and we click on the router, it takes us to our router information. Now let's go back and say I don't want the links to look like this, or I don't want it to be a percentage. I want to see the actual throughput. Well, if we go back to our map editor, and I believe it's map properties. Nope, it's not map properties, map style. Here we go. Here's where we can actually kind of configure what we want things to look like. So our link labels right now are set to percentage. Let's go ahead and change that to bits per second. We can have none if we just want it to be really clean and only show up the colors, but I like to see the actual bandwidth. Keep the HTML style like this unless you want static HTML, but it's not going to dynamically update with the colors and everything if you select static. The arrow type is the link type, actually. I like the compact ones better, so I'm going to select that. And we can change the font for each of these different types of devices. So we can have a different font for our nodes, a different font for our labels, or link labels, and a different font for our legend. And then these are just the samples. But I'm going to go ahead and submit those changes. So these are the more compact links that I like better. They're a little bit smaller, a little bit cleaner. And instead of it showing a percentage, it'll show us the actual bandwidth in bits per second. Now I am just going to change a couple of these fonts just to show the difference. Go ahead and submit that. That made our node names a lot smaller, our link bandwidth a lot bigger, and our traffic load, it changed to bold, basically. Now let's go ahead and go back to the live one, and refresh and see what our changes are. And it looks like it's pretty much already picked up all of them, so that's good. But we can see now instead of the percent, it is 3.69 megabits per second. That's what's being used in this direction. And then between my desktop and my core switch, we got 21,000 bits per second. So that is pretty much the quick and dirty on how to create a map. If you want to delete it, I did say I would show you that. So let's go ahead and open a PuTTY instance, and you're going to want to SSH to your LibreNMS host. So for me, that's 10.88.88.115. Go ahead and SSH to it, log in, LibreNMS. And just to kind of see where we're going here, I'm going to open another page. And we'll throw this to the left, and I'm going to go to our overview plugins and click Weathermap to access the editor. Click the link to access the editor. And this is the path that we're looking for. Opt LibreNMS, HTML plugins, Weathermap, yada yada. So we're going to go ahead and change directory on our host to that file path. HTML plugins, Weathermap configs. And we'll just go ahead and do a list. And here are our configuration files, and they should match up with these three on the left. So these are all the maps we've created. Ignore index.php, that's a default file. But we have our December Line 2, Toasty, and VRRP configuration files. Now if we want to delete one of those, we just do the rm and our map we want to delete. That is the only way to delete these. Now another important note, let's go ahead and change directory 1 back. So we're just under the HTML plugins Weathermap directory. If we do a list here, this is where it actually creates the image files and our HTML files. So if you end up creating a lot of maps and deleting a lot of maps, this can get a little bit out of hand. You can see there's actually a lot more HTML and image files in here than I have maps. You can see I had a new test at one point, December 20212, etc., etc. So if you delete a configuration file, you probably want to back up a directory and also delete the image and HTML file that goes along with it. Now also, if you click on your map and it doesn't show anything, go to this directory and make sure you have an image and an HTML file for it. And what I mean by that is, let's go ahead and just create another test map. Create, oh yeah, it has to have .conf at the end, so testmap.conf. Let's create. I'm just going to add a blank whatever node here. Pick, Biscuit, sure. Add a node. Pick, Docker, sure, submit. And we'll go ahead and add a link just for safe measure from Biscuit to Docker. Edit that, and we're going to pick just a random one. I don't really care. But now we have this new map. Now if we go back to LibreNMS, plugins, Weathermap, and pick our new map, you can see it says file not found. So this is what happens when you don't specify HTML or an image file path. So in our editor, we're going to go map properties, and we're going to specify the output image, testmap.jpg. We'll go ahead and submit that. This should still say file not found because we don't have the HTML file. But once we put in testmap.html and submit and refresh this, it does take it a minute, but it should actually give us a map at that point. And if you are curious, you can go back into PuTTY, do another list, and just make sure it created those files. And you can see it looks like it hasn't yet because we don't have a testmap.html or a testmap.jpg in this directory. And let's see, I've waited about a minute. I'm still not seeing it in there. Sometimes this is where Weathermap gets hung up, is on actually creating these files and letting you look at your map. So let's go ahead and just add another node to this map. Select a data source, office switch, submit, and then go back and see if it created that, and it didn't. So this is a great example of the clunkiness of Weathermap, and this is probably going to be your main problem, is getting this file not found error. And it is because it's either not creating or hasn't created the actual files needed for you to view it yet. And trust me, it will eventually. Sometimes you'll get impatient, sometimes you'll want to go in and just create a whole new map or copy that map you just created and make a new file name. So I am going to show you one last thing. Maybe that map will get created while I'm doing this, but one more note is, say you notice that one of your links is backwards. So say that you're downloading 100 meg from your router, but it's showing it as your switch sending 100 meg to the router instead. Then you can kind of flip your link configurations if you notice that happening. Click on the link. In this data source that it automatically filled out, there are two fields at the end, and that's in octets and out octets. Basically, all you have to do is flip these from in to out octets and then out to in. And if I hit submit, that would basically flip the in and the out of that link. So if we did notice the switch sending 100 meg to the router, when we know we're downloading 100 meg from the router, if we flip this, it'll flip the link and it'll be correct. So that's note number one. Note number two is if you have a node that has multiple links to a device, so say, I would say a port channel, but usually you have an actual port channel interface that you can add to a link. But for me, like I have 3 different VPNs to a single site, and say I want to see the bandwidth of all of those as a single link, because technically it's only using one VPN at a time. So if I add another node here, and we'll just put line IS or whatever, and give it the firewall icon. If we add a link between there and pick some interfaces, you can see that we have 2 checkboxes here, and that's append target to existing one, aggregate, and ignore blank interface descriptions. Now, I never really check the ignore one, but if I pick my interface, so we'll just say, for example, VTun, Virtual Tunnel 13, I don't know why there's 2 of them, but we'll pick one of them. What we can do is click Pick from LibreNMS again and say we want to also add VTI 13 because that's another VPN tunnel to the same destination. What we need to do is click Append Target and then click VTI 13. And what that does is it just adds it to the end. So we're actually monitoring both ports on this link instead of just the one. So we can aggregate a bunch of port data down into one link. You just have to make sure this is always checked before you select your next interface, or else it will override it as all just one. And if we go back to Toasty's map, you can see it's kind of caught up. It's got the new node, but it doesn't have the new link. And we can keep kind of trying to refresh that. Let's go ahead and open another tab here and see if it just created our test map files. And yep, it did. So you see, eventually it will create those files. Let's go back into our host, do another list. And yeah, we can see at some point while we were doing that, it created the test map HTML and test map JPEG files. So it does lag significantly behind what you're actually working on. Let's go ahead and refresh this, see if we got anything else. Nope, we don't yet. Well, anyways, while I'm waiting on that, I'll go ahead and end this video. Hopefully this showed how to get a weather map off the ground, kind of some of these very specific things you have to do to make it actually work, and hopefully cleared up some of the questions on like, how do you even delete a map after it's created, or why does mine always say file not found, etc., etc. So as always, hopefully you learned something, and also as always, happy networking.